Hello, welcome to Monument to Movement's Speakeasy Conversation series with today's focus on the Monument to Evolving Democracies. I'm Neysa Page-Lieberman, co-founder of Monuments to Movements, along with my brilliant colleague Jane Sachs. We are so excited for today's program as we've been in conversations with our guests, Albie Sachs and Vanessa September, for over a year as we've imagined this initiative together. So before we get started, just a few quick notes. This program will be recorded. The final recording will be uploaded on YouTube and on our website, just like the rest of our Speakeasy conversations. When we get to the Q&A portion later on in the program, please enter your questions using the Q&A tool. That's where we'll be looking to grab questions from the audience. Our chat is also enabled, and throughout today's discussion, we'll be popping links in there for further references of topics that relate to what we'll be discussing today. Finally, live transcription is enabled should you want to use that resource today. So if this is your introduction to Monuments to Movements, M2M is an international organization that envisions, develops, and commissions public artwork that monumentalizes movement making and collective action. We offer a new vision and an evolving process that is not just inclusive of the world's diversity, but also paradigm shifting, feminist, and centered in restorative justice. We believe monuments should elevate collective action, not hero worship, and we do this through an intersectional feminist framework. We're a small but mighty staff, along with Marcela Andrade, Aarya, Malik, and Kelsey Bogdan, who's running our Zoom program today. We're joined by an expansive international group of movement builders, who you can find more information about on our website. So thank you to our M2M team, and thank you for all of us to joining our Speakeasy series. Speakeasy is a public conversation series where we discuss our current initiatives and ideas with our extraordinary collaborators. Today's program is our 4th edition. We do one every month, the second Tuesday of each month. And today's Speakeasy is about the Monument to Evolving Democracies, which is an M2M initiative that is centered on an exchange of art and ideas. The Monument to Evolving Democracies involves teams led by artists with various communities that range generations and histories and geographies that are based here in the US and South Africa and beyond. And these artist-led groups will create works that interrogate, question, and engage ideas around building, sustaining, and strengthening democracies and participation. The inaugural series of collaborative works will launch in South Africa, one of the newest democracies globally. So I'm going to do very brief introductions of our panelists that in no way do justice to who they are and what they've accomplished, but we will pop in links to much more thorough biographies of both of them, so check the chat for that. Vanessa September is the CEO of Constitution Hill Trust, located at Constitutional Court and the site of the Old Fort Prison in Johannesburg, South Africa. The trust was established in 2006 to promote respect for the South African Constitution and human rights, and September works towards transforming the site of Constitution Hill into a monument for hope and democracy. She holds a Master's of Architecture and a Master's of Urban Design, with a focus on transforming underutilized spaces into well-functioning public spaces through community-led design processes. Albie Sachs. A lead ANC lawyer in the struggle against apartheid, Albie Sachs is an educator, human rights advocate, and survivor of political imprisonment, exile, and an assassination attempt. He has played a central role in establishing South Africa's constitutional democracy. Sachs co-drafted the ANC's Code of Conduct and statutes for a new democratic constitution, and later as a member of the Constitutional Committee helped negotiations which led to South Africa becoming a democracy. He was appointed by President Nelson Mandela to serve on the newly established Constitutional Court. He's been deeply engaged in centering art and design in the development of the Constitutional Court building. So we're going to show a brief video that kind of further elucidates some of the conversation that we're going to have with our panelists today. And then we're going to have brief presentations from Vanessa and Albie before we launch into the rest of the project. So Kelsey, if you could please play the video now. Thank you so much.
Welcome to Artbeat. I'm Jeffrey Brown. It is artwork that symbolizes the transformation of South Africa, and the setting is the Constitutional Court, itself sitting on the site of a former jail that during the apartheid era held both Nelson Mandela and Mohandas Gandhi. Here to tell us about the collection and the need to maintain it is South Africa's Constitutional Court Justice Edwin Cameron. And nice to see you again after a number of years.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
First, tell us about what is the collection? How do you describe it?
It's an extraordinary collection that started 20 years ago when South Africa became a democracy and the court was founded as the guardian of this new aspirational visionary constitution. My predecessor, Justice Albie Sachs, started it, and it's made the court quite a unique place. It's got a beautiful building, and it houses this extraordinary art collection which has been accumulated over 20 years, an art collection that symbolizes the best aspirations of our democracy, of reconciliation, of justice, and of transformation.
And how does it do that? Because it's impossible to separate the art from those aspirations. Precisely. And that history.
In fact, they don't. They represent that history. And the best South African artists donated their works to the collection. And so you see works representing both the anguish of our apartheid past, but also the aspirations of our democratic future in this extraordinary range of internationally acclaimed works.
Are there works that, tell us about some of them, especially some that might have meaning to you?
Marlene de Maas is perhaps one of the world's best famed women artists. William Kentridge is very well known here on the East Coast.
Internationally.
Dumile Feni is very well known, did some of his best work here on the East Coast in America. And the works are plangent, they're poignant, they're expressive, and they hung in this beautiful gallery, which is the court's public foyer, and of course also in the judges' gallery, the private part where we do our judicial work.
And the site itself, as I mentioned, a former jail.
Oh, precisely. In our courtroom, we have the bricks from the jail, the jail which was right adjacent to a famous prison where Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, other political prisoners were kept. And those bricks were taken and built into our courtroom. So we sit in the courtroom hearing argument on what our Constitution means, with our history seeping into our deliberations. And of course, the artworks do exactly the same.
One of the reasons you're here, though, and traveling around is because of the requirement of conserving, preserving, maintaining this collection. What's the problem that you're facing?
We're on tough times, Jeffrey. The works belong to a trust. We can't ask government to support them because of other claims on the justice system. We can't ask local institutions or funders to support them because of conflict of interest issues.
So that limits who you can turn to, I see.
Very difficult. We want to keep the works independently of the state bureaucratic structure for very good reasons. So we're asking for aesthetically and artistically minded and justice-minded donors to support us, to join us, to partner us in preserving the collection.
Is it too much of a leap to suggest that this need to maintain the artwork parallels the need to maintain what's going on in South Africa?
I don't think it is.
I'm trying to make a leap, but make it for
No,
me.
it's a lovely leap, and it's a symbolic leap, and it's an apposite leap.
Yeah.
I think it is, because after 20 years, we're in a precarious position. I don't mind saying that because it's true. We're struggling for the rule of law in so many parts of Africa. In Swaziland, our neighbor, Zimbabwe, our neighbor, Botswana, our neighbor, we ourselves, democracy and freedom is a struggle every day, and rightly so. So we've got enormous challenges of crime and corruption and governmental infrastructure, integrity, difficult issues, and I think the leap you've made is right. So the artworks in a precarious spot, fighting for the artworks, but also fighting for the underlying project, the project of making a viable democracy in our country with this aspirational constitution, the constitution that your own Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg lauded as an example for other countries to look to. And the artworks and their maintenance and their support are integral to what we're trying to sustain and to achieve.
I'll bet for many people watching, they're thinking 20 years. It's who would have thought? We've already passed 20 years. Do you think yourself 20 years we're at the right place, or this is the, or where are you at?
We know where we should be, nowhere near to where we should be, but we've achieved an enormous amount. We're a functioning democracy. We have a separation of powers. We have government accepting the authority of the courts. We've had the courts giving signal rulings. For example, on AIDS, the program today, South Africa's program of antiretroviral provision, is rooted in a court decision which was produced by activist demands against President Mbeki. So the Constitution has had a practical impact on South African life in very moving and important ways. So we've achieved a lot, but we're nowhere near to where we ought to be.
All right, Justice Edwin Cameron on art and justice. Thanks so much.
Pleasure to be here.
And thank you for joining us again on Artbeat. I'm Jeffrey Brown.
And, I'm going to speak to follow up with that as planned. And I want to wave to Edwin. And it just reminds me, it takes me back so much, that quote. Edwin, an openly gay man living with HIV, one of our most brilliant judges. Albie Sachs, you've already heard, amputated arm. My colleague, Zach Yakub, blind since the age of 15 months. I don't know another court in the world that's had such a diversity, if you like, of judges. And yet that's the diversity of a nation that's still very much in pain, that's still agonized, that's still searching for ways forward. There's a lot of conflict in our country, and the democracy can't be separated from healing the divisions of the past, from ensuring that the benefits of democracy are enjoyed by everybody, and just not by a new class of entrepreneurs or even a new class of well-organized workers. So all of these things come together. In terms of M2M, I think our special contribution to the discussion was we didn't set out to build a monument. We didn't get a whole lot of artists to build a monument. We needed a court, a building for the nation to function. But we chose the site. We had competition for the architects. We chose the most daring project, and we filled that project with artistic sensibility, with feeling, with sensibility. And I think that's one of the things that M2M should be considering doing, not simply building monuments, but introducing, it's more than a pattern, it's an element of the integrity of buildings, of roadways, of bridges, of things that we need, investing them with that artistic sensibility. And that's something that can be done certainly in South Africa and certainly in the United States.
Thanks, Albie, for that extra comment. So I'm Vanessa September. I also happen to be, Albie and I are spouses to each other. And the term spouse has been introduced into the language of the Constitution after there was a case, which in fact Albie wrote the judgment for, that allowed people of the same genders to marry. And so hence the word spouse, but I'm digressing. So as Albie said, we didn't set out to build a movement when we, or a monument to democracy when the court collected this artwork. It was merely a role of one of the judges to do, to manage some of the decor of the court, and it's turned into this wonderful collection. And now, as the Constitution Hill Trust, which I'm the CEO of, we are expanding that concept of how we use art and how we work with the precinct, which we consider to be the equivalent of our Capitol Hill. So if you went to South Africa and you say, take me to your leader, your political leader, not your political leader, but your spiritual leader of the country, we'd want people to come to Constitution Hill as the site where so many were incarcerated. And sorry, my battery is running low. What timing to get a bad battery, sorry. So the site is becoming this beacon of light and hope for South Africa, and sort of the spiritual home of our democracy. And within the precinct, then, we are looking at how other activities can happen that honors the Constitution, that promotes education about the Constitution, and that allows people to come there to feel the spirit of that democracy. So whilst Albie talks to the original intention of the Constitution and that Artworks program, we are now building on and continuing to expand that. And one of the things we are doing is developing a program around a 12th chair. So I say 12 because there are 11 chairs that are the chairs that are occupied by the 11 constitutional court justices. I think your Supreme Court has 9, if I'm not wrong. And so South Africa has 11. And these judges are the custodians of the Constitution. And behind Albie, you'll see the word "We, the people of South Africa." Those are the first words of the preamble to our Constitution. And so we created this chair, or the competition for a chair, which would be the 12th chair, and it would be the chair of the people, to speak their minds, to speak truth to power, if I can use a slogan, so that people feel that they have also the opportunity and a seat from which they can speak to the values of the Constitution and speak against some of the negatives that are going on in the country, of which there are plenty, not dissimilar to some of yours, but specifics also to South Africa. And so the concept of this chair then, which we didn't think about it being a monument, but essentially it's a monument to the people and their need to protect our democracy through voicing their values and their interests, and as I said, speaking truth to power. So we'll speak a little bit more to some of the details, but I think I might stop here because we want to enter into conversation with Jane and her colleagues and the rest of you on the call.
Thank you so much, Albie and Vanessa. I just have to say, it just means so much for me to have all of us in conversation with you. We have been in conversation, the three of us, for now decades, and decades, and it has evolved in so many ways. So I can't tell you what it means for us to now talk about democracies, because when I met Albie, we were talking about anti-apartheid. I want to just briefly introduce 2 videos. We ask artists to participate in these conversations and make an offering to the topic. And today we have the artists Bethany Collins and Gottesman. And what they're really just talking about is, discussing the artist's role of interrogating, investigating, supporting, building democracy.
I'm Bethany Collins. I'm a visual artist based in Chicago, although I'm originally from Montgomery, Alabama. And my work, my entire practice is language-based. Language is the subject and primary material of my practice. Encyclopedias, dictionaries, old newspaper archives, I am often seeking language from the past that helps me make sense of now, right? Tell me what came before, show me that archive so that I can understand this particular moment that we are living within. So let me give you an example. One of the first works I made after the 2016 US presidential election was America, a Hymnal. This hymnal is composed of 100 versions of My Country 'Tis of Thee that were written from the 18th to 20th centuries. So the melody of My Country 'Tis of Thee remains consistent, you know it. But the lyrics were rewritten over the course of 2 centuries for various political causes. Suffrage, temperance, prohibition, native sovereignty. The Confederacy has their version of My Country 'Tis of Thee versions, and so does the Union and Abolitionist. Oftentimes, these versions of what it means to be American are in direct opposition to one another. So for the hymnal, I bound those 100 versions together and then burned away the musical notation, the sheet music, notes and staff lines, it's gone. What remains then, in addition to the scorch marks from the burning, are those 100 dissenting versions of what it means to be American, forever bound together. For me, this work is a reminder in that particular moment that even at our best, we have never been in full accord, and that the same song, the same text, can feel and sound familiar and estranging. The same place can feel quite familiar and estranging, same time. The work is very much a kind of response to the state of democracy then and now. But this question of what is the role of the artist in a democratic society is tricky for me, because I know that my interest as citizen and as artist, they overlap. My interests overlap. But I also think of my practice as quite distinct, that it requires a kind of nimbleness and openness to consider color, form, time, ideas that don't so directly and always relate to this particular moment that we're living within. And to link them indelibly would be like tying a weight on a balloon, right? That it's too heavy for the possibilities of the work. What I think that the work is offering, or I'll say this, that there are hymnals in collections of institutions that I think in 20 years will remain as pristine as they are today. Ideal, right? And then there are hymnals in private collections or institutions that actually invite the viewer to turn the page. And because of all of that burning and residue and scorch marks and the negative space that's left from the burning away of the musical notation, all of that, the more you turn the page, the messier it becomes, and the more you aid in the complication of the work, the potential destruction of the work. What is satisfying for me is that both of those possibilities exist, right? That there will be pristine, perfect works in 20 years, and there will be utter works of destruction in 20 years, and they're both equally possible. I also think that's what the work is offering, right? To this question of what is the role of the artist in a democratic society, that's what the work is offering, not a resolution. There is no answer hidden within the pages of the hymnal. Rather, it presents at least two possibilities for our future. Pristine, but without progress, right? It's been on the shelf for 20 years. Nothing has changed. Or that the more we participate, the potential for the better of all of us. It's not a guarantee, but the potential for some improvement here. The possibilities, the work is a kind of offering of possibilities without answer or resolution.
Hi, my name is Eric Gottesman. I'm a visual artist and one of the co-founders of the organization For Freedoms. And I'm thrilled to be contributing to this project by Project And, whose work I find so vital. I'm especially excited because these questions of the relationship between art and democracy are foundational for me. I started my career not as an artist, but as somebody who was going into constitutional law and working at the Supreme Court of the United States, witnessing some of the most brilliant intellects of our time argue these extremely foundational questions of what democracy is and can do within the United States. And I was totally turned on by that. And I also felt like something was missing. And what drove me into art is the possibility that the artist can address some of these basic questions of democracy, not only through our intellects, but also through our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our souls. And so the role of the artist, I feel, within a democracy is to make these fundamental basic needs for how we relate to one another felt, to promote hybridity through modeling what we can be with one another. In my own artistic practice, I do that not only through collaboration, working together towards a common goal and producing things together, but through co-creation, where I'm often working in communities or with other people to meld my vision of the world with somebody else's vision, to create what often ends up being something of a collective surprise for both me and the people that I'm working with. It's through that modeling of what cohabitation, coexistence, co-creation can look like that I feel art has the power to project an image of what a democracy can be. Of course, there are needs within that need to be provided and afforded to the artist or to anybody trying to express themselves. And it's gotten complicated in recent years to not only carve out free speech and space for free expression, but also to recognize when the calls for free expression are being abused or co-opted or turned into something that can actually harm some of the institutions and the basic ideas about democracy. So in short, that's how I see my role as an artist and the role of the artist in addressing democracy. I think without art, it's hard to imagine what a democracy could be. And that is at the essence of what American democracy has been. It's always only been a vision, never the reality. And so, yeah, art is vital. Thank you very much.
Hi, I want to offer a couple of reflections on those videos, and then kind of lead into the conversation that we'll have together. But, you know, as we just heard, Eric really talks about the fact that there can't be a democracy without art and culture. He also is somebody who has never produced an artwork alone. It's always in collaboration. But I think they both talk about really, in some ways, modeling their practice after democracy, right? They both speak very much about the potential, right? And they're offering possibilities, but not necessarily having arrived there yet. Eric really talks about engagement and participation being at the center of his practice and at the center of the practice of democracy. And I think that's also an interesting thing. We practice democracy in the way we create our practices as creative beings. I think also what's interesting with Bethany is that, she talks about we kind of have these choices, whether we keep things pristine or whether we move through an evolution of the work, a deconstructing of it to maybe reconstruct something totally different, in the same way that I can say in South Africa that, you have done that. I also, I want to kind of lead into the questions and also invite you to comment on videos, the videos as you want as offerings. But I love your line, Vanessa, take me to your leader, right? And what you're saying is take me to your leader. It's an evolving democracy and your leader cannot lead without your participation, right? And so it's the kind of leader I want to be taken to and that there are so little of. And I think also, Albie really talking about past, present, and future, right? Building the court, building the philosophy, the tenets, the legality of the court on the ground that was also the jail and the prison and this unjust place. And I think for Neysa and I, why we really wanted to create M2M was that, everybody kept asking us, what do you think about knocking the head off of this one or taking that one down? And we're saying, yeah, take Robert E. Lee down, knock off the head of Columbus. But we still have to have the conversation of who we were, who we still are, and who we aspire to be. And so it's not a calcified endeavor. It's exactly, Albie, what you were saying. It's a porous endeavor. It's an evolving endeavor. We seek to create monuments as living, breathing, sometimes ephemeral kind of gestures of participation, self-reflection, and thinking about where we've been, where we are, and together where we actually want to go. So I think maybe if you guys could just talk a little bit of, really briefly about being part of M2M and how that has impacted your work, your thinking, and we can talk later about what we're kind of like developing together. But I want to say that, you were two of the people that we thought of right away when we were creating M2M. You both participated in the workshops. I mean, for me personally, you're two of my favored nations. I would do any trade collaboration partnership with you and all that you think about. And so maybe just talk a little bit about why you want to be part of M2M and what that has already brought to your thinking, and then, kind of moving forward.
I've just read recently a wonderful phrase by the new director of the Museum of Contemporary African Art on the waterfront in Cape Town, Koyo Kuo. And she says, if your ideas don't frighten you, if they don't scare you, they're not worth having. And when you issued this invitation to almost like the two little us far away in Cape Town to become part of an international movement, well, that's crazy. The world's huge and there's 6 billion people, and you're singling out two to cross the Atlantic and liaise with you. But I've worked with you before, and so it's a blind venture based on trust. But the trust has been built up over a couple of decades. And the trust comes from, it's the way your brain and your heart and your skills and your social connections and the diversity of your connections seem to come together, that I feel, okay, it's a pretty wacky idea from a very wacky person who gets other wacky people to come on board. And I like it because it's out of that unknown quality. It's not very precise. It's not preordained. It's not putting everybody to the wheel. We don't even know what the wheel is. But it's based on a deep intuition that art, if it's simply pieces, works to be bought and displayed and admired, it's so feeble. It's so feeble. But buildings and places and spaces, if they're simply places to walk through or eat a hamburger or whatever you might eat, and there's no resonance, there's no sense of place, there's no texture, there's no symbolism, it's boring, it's sterile. Most court buildings go out of their way to be sterile. They think it's great to be sterile. They say that kind of sterility and aridity is equated to impartiality. And that's absolute rubbish. In planning our court development that came with our new democracy, I looked at a lot of courts in the United States. And one of the most interesting and valuable one was, I was directed to it by Stephen Breyer, who's just retired from the Constitutional Court. And he supervised the development of the Court of Appeal in Boston. And it's a terrific building. And it's based on the principle of the town hall. But I looked at it and there's no art. And I asked them, and excuse my accent now, if people want a bit of a laugh, it's my attempting an American accent. We Americans can agree on iconography. Now, we didn't have to agree on iconography. We wanted it there. We wanted the artwork there. We trusted the artists. The diversity, the challenge, the reverberations was part and parcel of what we wanted. The courtroom, our decisions have to be focused, precise, they uphold particular rights, but there can be poetry even in a judgment and an opinion. And the idea of there being poetry in the building and the sense of humanity in the building was very central to our project. So this is something that we are so proud of and we love to share. We love to share with the US of A, that's the biggest and the best and the greatest and the most MAGA country in the whole world. And we've got something better. It's better not because it's more powerful, not because it's more opulent, not because it's got more braggadocio about it. It's better because it reaches into the human soul and people respect it and respond to it. So I think M2M is the kind of organization that is sufficiently open, viable, curious, and willing to take risks to establish connections. And we got huge support in our anti-apartheid struggle. Artists for a New South Africa was even the name, but with people who drop names like Denzel and Samuel and Alfrey and CHH. were supporting us in our struggle in a very, very special kind of a way. And visual artists were helping us as well. And you, Jane, and where I began this little presentation, you got it. You got it. You gave us the right kind of support and the right kind of help because you felt it and because you were struggling in the US. And if we can link up with you, it's because we're struggling, as Edwin Cameron put it so pertinently. We've got big struggles. Our democracy is under threat, it's being undermined, and defending our democracy, it's not even so much, or defending it, it evolves, but defending it enables the arts to flourish. Flourishing arts enable democracy to be rich and meaningful and personalized.
So Albie, there's not a lot that I can add to your wonderful reflections on the relevance for us of M2M, except maybe to say, Jane, that one always comes away from conversations with you totally inspired, reviewing how you think, challenging the status quo, and in fact, when we had our discussions from a year ago with Neysa and your other colleagues, it made us reflect on what it is we were doing in South Africa and the work that we are doing, and it made so much sense that one could reflect on it as monuments that we were creating. We didn't set out to create the monuments, as Albie said in one of his earlier reflections, but as it turned out, when we look back on it, we see that in the interest of projecting the values of the Constitution into the present and into the future, one of the ways in which we can do that rather effectively is through art, and not just two-dimensional arts, which for a moment I thought, Albie, you said was feeble, which I don't think Eric would enjoy hearing, but the idea that art gives people an opportunity to engage with all their senses, and not just two-dimensional art, as I said, or sculpture, but also music as a form of expression. And in South Africa, we've got that in spades. Every meeting you go to, every gathering, there's always sound. And one of the things, if you wanted me to comment on Bethany's presentation, I wished we could hear the hymn, but maybe I have to go and listen to the hymn on her website. Maybe there wasn't enough time.
I'll send it to you. It's
great.
I'll send it to you. It's known by all
reflections
Americans.
over 200 years. And just by the way, Albie, there are 9 billion people on the planet, not 6. You're a little bit out of date. So all the more reason why the values of democracies are so important, because our nations are growing and it's so easy to fall off the track. I mean, we know in South Africa, it's quite a challenge. And so, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to pick up on what you're saying. I mean, you know, you both come from different points of view as an architect and urban planner. You know, how you think about how we engage in space and the systems and, you know, who we are in different spaces. We are, you know, we as people are not calcified, and we don't move through space being the same person. And we know that. I mean, spaces have been created to belittle people, and then spaces have been created to make them even feel more powerful than they are. So I want to just pick up on what you're saying, Vanessa, and really talk about an evolving democracy, right? You actually have lived through and know what it feels like to have no democracy. And Albie does too, but in a different way than you do. And so I thought maybe you could just talk a little bit about what it means to have actually been somebody who is impacted by the lack of democracy as well as the presence of democracy.
Well, the first thing is that I couldn't have Albie as a spouse, with us coming from different cultural backgrounds, literally on the opposite sides of the railway line, but in South Africa, opposite sides of the mountain, because in South Africa, the landscape, particularly Cape Town, the landscape was used as an element to separate people. And Table Mountain, which is an iconic World Heritage Site, was sort of at the center of Cape Town, the beacon of where the divisions happened in the country. I wouldn't have an adorable son called Oliver by the fact that I wouldn't have been able to marry Albie. And I couldn't have followed a childhood dream to study architecture, even if I could afford it. And my parents and their parents before them were destined to remain in the cycle of poverty as a result of being undereducated, being relegated to low-paying jobs that merely secured their survival and left little to no room for anything aspirational. So it took the destruction of apartheid and the system of apartheid to open doors to provide access to universities and well-paying jobs. And if you qualified, and now we could become qualified, we could apply for those well-paying jobs, which in turn create opportunities for our children, which our parents couldn't offer us in lifestyle, in freedoms, in understanding difference and diversity and acceptance of difference and diversity. So our son Oliver, who's now 15, for him, none of the issues that I grew up with are relevant. I mean, he can't even begin to understand what that's about. He gets sort of a little bit annoyed with me when I overreact in situations where I feel as a Black woman, I'm not being in public spaces, I'm being, if you like, undermined. And I have to sort of push myself to not become extreme in my response. And Oliver notices this and says, but you overreacted there, Mum. But he doesn't understand the core foundation from which the platform from which you respond in public life. And so these are things that over time, they become softer. But, small things can sometimes just scratch in a place where it's very uncomfortable, something that relates to the past. And then there could be little explosions. So in that sense, we are evolving as individuals. And we are, as individuals, collectively communities, and collectively as communities to the country. So whilst the laws are one thing and the Constitution is amazing, it's one of the best in the world, it's one of the newest in the world, there is one a little later, it's the Kenyan Constitution based on ours. The laws are there, but they need to be realized. And really it's up to us as people to realize, to live to the values that the Constitution allows us to experience now. So Oliver, lucky boy, grows up in this world as a free person who can't understand any of these crazy things that we would have experienced. Although in growing up in a home like ours, he's more attuned to the situation than most kids his age. But it's this is what we fought for, what Albie lost his arm for, other people lost their lives for, parents lost their children, mothers lost their sons and husbands and so on, in order that we can live in a free country, a free society, just society, but still one with a lot of difficulties, and which we are working on.
Thank you so much for that, Vanessa. And this is a good segue into another topic we wanted to discuss. You were talking about your experience as a Black person, but also as a woman. And, in Monuments to Movements, we center all of our work on an intersectional feminist framework. In fact, our last speakeasy was all about our feminist practices with Melissa Potter and Michelle Duster. And in our last conversation with you, Vanessa and Albie, we were talking about the role that feminism plays in the Constitutional Court. And specifically, Albie, you were talking about the Constitutional Court adopting critical race feminism and intersectionality in its decisions. And so we would love for you both to share some more on that.
I'll leave it to Albie.
Okay. Yes, in the year 2000, thereabouts, we were called upon by National Coalition of Lesbian and Gay Equality to strike down the law that criminalized sodomy. And the arguments then were, do we say the law that made sodomy a criminal offense? What section of the Constitution does it invade? Is it an invasion of privacy, or is it an invasion of dignity, or is it an invasion of the right to equality? And I thought, well, it's all of those. If it's just privacy, it makes it look as the equality aspect is not important. You can do your thing in your privacy of your home. If it's just equality, it doesn't reach to the intimacy of the invasion. it's the superimposition of treating some people differently, persecuting them for their most intimate aspects of their life and the expression of their love. And I happen to have a law clerk named Sharon McPherson, African American from the United States. And she said, Albie, you know, if you follow Kimberly Crenshaw, she speaks about critical race feminism and intersectionality. And that footnote came in the year 2000, intersectionality. They all reinforce the other. It's more egregious because it deals with your intimate life. It's more egregious because some people are treated differently from others, and it invades dignity. Last year, we had a case where that intersectionality was taken out of the realm of sexual orientation into protecting the rights of domestic workers. Many classes of workers get protection for occupational injury. Domestic workers were not included. They put up their hands and said, hey, what about us? And people said, well, that's for Parliament, the legislature to deal with. There's no fundamental rights involved. What are your fundamental rights? And not all domestic workers are women. Not all domestic workers are Black. Not all domestic workers are poor. But overwhelmingly in South Africa, domestic workers are women, they are Black, and they're poor, and they're vulnerable. And using the doctrine of intersectionality introduced by Sharon McPherson in a footnote in the year 2000, in the year 2022, the court said the Occupational Injuries Act is unconstitutional because it doesn't provide protection against for domestic workers being injured in the home, applying the doctrine of intersectionality. And it's no accident that the court picked that up. I would say half the judges on our court had parents, mothers or grandmothers who were domestic workers. The impact and memories of apartheid are still very, very strong. And you still see in the homes of so many people this inequality and the vulnerability of domestic workers. So the court's responding not in terms of categories and definitions, but in response to real life as lived by real people. And I think that's a strength of our court, something that we actually offer to the world, and not just to South Africa.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad you spoke so beautifully about domestic workers too, and how essential they are to all of our societies. That's another monument that we're all working on together, is the monument to human infrastructure, honoring and recognizing, celebrating domestic workers and how they work with all of us to sustain our lives and enrich our lives and improve our lives. And it's time that this is recognized very publicly and through art. So we're getting a couple questions from audience, and I'm going to try to combine a little bit here. So one of the questions was, how we may build an international exchange between art and ideas and communities. And another question is around, kind of further elaborating what an artist's role may be in interrogating, challenging, building, sustaining democracies. So if we could all talk about this a little bit, anyone that wants to jump in.
Maybe you can start, Vanessa. I mean, just in terms of, post-apartheid, you went back to high school, and you and Albie went to the prom, and then you wanted to go to architecture school. And so you were so engaged with international ideas and design. And why was that the thing that you wanted to do? And how does that kind of assist us in the way that we're developing that kind of exchange?
Maybe just a little bit of background. just a bit of background then to that dream. As I said earlier, there was this childhood dream to go and study architecture, and it came from going once per year, because that's the only time that the whole family, my dad was off from work, day after Christmas, which we call here Boxing Day. Not boxing, but I don't know why it's called Boxing Day, but it's family day essentially. And we would go to the beach by train. We'd pack all of our Christmas leftovers and we'd all schlep onto the train and go to a beach that was really a stretch of water at the edge of a harbor. And it's along the train journey, passing suburbs that were leafy with wide streets, big houses, totally opposite to the environments where I grew up, or I was very little then, but when I was growing up, where the houses were small, 8 children in 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom house, 50 square meters, that's about 150 feet square, and playing in the streets and having to dash out the way when the cars come, etc. And so I thought, as we were passing these houses, I thought one day when I'm big, I'd like to build houses like that for people like us. And people like us were people who were poor, who were marginalized, who didn't have resources. But clearly there was something different about that environment that I wasn't experiencing, and I was sort of longing for that. And then through my development as a young person, I spent a lot of time being interested in the rest of the world. And as soon as I could, started working 2 shifts in order to raise enough money to be able to help myself travel, because my day money was working for my family and supporting the family, and nighttime activity, working in restaurants as a waitress and such. I saved that money to be able to travel and to see the world, because there's this curiosity about what places could be like and how people could live in spaces that gives them feeling of dignity and confidence, and you just spaces in which you could feel empowered and happy, and where it's always beautiful, not always beautiful, but where you feel you can be a person. And it was only when I stepped out of South Africa, my first time when I was 23 years old, that I really felt like I'm a citizen. And I didn't experience that in South Africa until much later. And the Constitution came when I was 30 something. That gives away my age a little bit. But the idea that there can be spaces where you can just go and be a person. There are places in the world where you can just be a person. And the value that gives you, I mean, we've traveled extensively through the US and looking at public spaces and how communities brought together to create environments that are uplifting and encouraging and supportive and working collaboratively. So all of those experiences are things that I bring back and use in the way I work, and use in the way we are now working to make the knowledge of the Constitution accessible and open and available to all, through schools, from schools all the way through to people in the corporate environment. So I'm not quite sure if that answers the question, but it's a bit of a long answer. But essentially, this evolving need of mine personally to be in a space that I can contribute to being transformed, to allow others to feel themselves empowered, and to feel that it's a space in which they can dream to be part of a better system, a better society, and to have the laws in our country that allows them to do that. So if you should ask me, how do you sustain a democracy? For me, the question would be not how does democracy sustain itself, but how do we sustain it? It's because I feel that we play the major role. We are all the actors on the stage. The Constitution is merely the, if you like, the platform, the trampoline from which we bounce to experience life in a way that gives us reward. And in our case, we have a very good, strong, and fertile trampoline. And what we need is a government to lead it. And if they're not doing well, we should be able to voice our discontent and our dissent and push government to be accountable. And that's precisely what's going on in the country at the moment. There's a wonderful program or a campaign that's just been launched to challenge It's called Defend Our Democracy. They've been active for the last year and a half. And that's a movement, a movement to create change, but a movement to democracy. But can it be monumentalized? It's ephemeral. And but I think it is certainly something that's worth exploring in terms of how we manifest such a movement to produce change and transformation ongoing in a country based on this amazing foundation that we have built through people like Albie Mandela, many others, too many to mention the names, and I might leave some out, so rather not. So, but the point is that there's a lot of work that we need to continue doing to ensure that our democracy is evolving and it is what we need it to be. The responsibility is really with us as citizens.
Thank you. That is such a perfect segue to what I think is going to be our last question. And I wanted to include it because it's from an artist, and she's really responding to what we're talking about, what our role and responsibility is. And she's specifically asking, and I think this is in response to us talking about exchange between different countries and ideas.
Oh.
She's talking about what is the artist's role in responding to countries, democracies, societies that are not our own.
Can I make a very specific suggestion for exchange? Being forced to work digitally, we actually discovered the huge possibilities. We couldn't move, we couldn't gather, and we produced, for example, the story of the making of our Constitution. And it was so fascinating to do it. Professor Nomalanga Mkhize said, whatever you do, don't borrow Black iconography aesthetics from the US and impose it on South Africa. We must create our own South African Black aesthetic. And we got one of our great young artists to do a lot of the design. And we can send you that. It's 4 times 2 minutes or 5 times 2 minutes as an example of the way that artists are involved in telling our story. We also have other things that we produced that I think we can share, and maybe, I don't know how many hundreds of people are viewing. If they're interested, you can distribute it to them. And you can see, we certainly talk the talk, but every now and then we actually walk the walk, and we'd like you to join us in some of the walks that we've been on. There's quite a lot, and the importance of the visual and the emotional in dealing with humanity and rights and human beings for human beings. Even some of the things that we flashed up onto the ramparts of the prison, involving the public. Vanessa was very directly involved in that. And I think you will see, not for advertising, shoe sign or whatever people advertise, but for getting the public to send in what they feel we demand of our government, things that we want in our society. Maybe Vanessa can say something on that.
Yes, we had a campaign last year, April, Freedom Day, to mark Freedom Day, in which we invited the public to complete a sentence. We the people, blank, so that blank. And some of the messages that came in that were quite powerful, and it was giving voice, allowing people who were frustrated at the time to say what they aspire for our democracy, what they dream for our democracy. Or for our country. And so people would complete the sentence, children, and they would, some of the messages would go, we the people want the corruption to stop, so that all the money can be used for our children to be given good education. Or we the people would like the first Black woman Chief Justice, so that we feel our justice is more representative. Or we the people give our children jungle oats. It's like your oats, steel cut oats, so that they can grow up strong to fight and be leaders in the future. And so I mean, that's a silly one, but basically we had children and adults and very aspirational and dreaming for what our country could be and should be. And so that's, we feel, we contribute to what could be
And
monument.
they were projected. What was the lights used?
Yes. So we use this thing called Gobo Lights. It's a device where you imprint the text and then you project it onto huge surfaces, and you can project them for long distances and onto like, I think that you might have some of them onto your mountains in Hollywood, where you can project an image from a very far distance onto a surface. Quite powerful, and you could change these messages all the time, and as people drive by, they can engage with them. But
no, they're incredible. I mean, I don't even mean to interrupt, but we're getting very close to the edge. But I think I just want to pick up on one of the things you said, which is the idea of aspiration, right? And that democracy is always aspirational, right? Now, we've never just arrived, right? Because as we evolve as people, then the democracies that we want to be part of and that we're part of creating, shift and change. And I think Albie spoke to that as well as you. And I think I just want to end with something that that I think is really important, and do send us any information we have, because we will be sending out the video of this, and we can, add in any links or post it on social media. I think, I just want to announce the next Speakeasy. If you enjoyed this one, all the past ones are on our website, monumenttomovements.org. The next one is going to be on May 10th, and that's Monument to Female Creative Liberation. A talk about aspirational, and that will be with our colleagues at the American Jazz Museum. So let me just end with one thing, which is something that Albie has really taught me throughout all the decades, was that the relationship between art and justice is human dignity. And I would say that justice is one of the key things of a democracy. And so that is human dignity. And so the relationship between art and democracy is human dignity. And you are two people who have really spent your whole entire lives really focusing on human dignity in so many different forms, but the content, is always the same. And I can speak for Neysa, because we only have a minute left. She can't tell me I can't, but is that, partnering with the two of you and everything that comes with you is really at the core of what Monuments to Movements is about. And you're two of the most aspirational and evolving and self-reflective people. And that's also part of what democracy has to be. So on behalf of everyone at M2M and my co-founder, Neysa Page-Lieberman, I want to thank you both for being here today, tonight, and we can't tell you how much we look forward to continuing our work together. And thank you so much for walking the walk, because we want to be on that walk with you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Thanks for having
everyone.
us.
Thank you, Albie and Vanessa. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.